back here on ThinkTech. Today we're going to talk about American issues, take two. And the question is, where will Putin want to go next? The domino theory. What does he have in mind after Ukraine? A subject that has been discussed on and off since a year ago when he invaded. And for this discussion, we have our co-host, Tim Apicella. We have our regular contributor, Stephanie Stoll-Dalton. And we have our esteemed guest, Manfred Henningsen. Our panel is going to discuss Putin's moves. Welcome to the show, everybody. Tim, Stephanie, Manfred. Tim, let's start with you. Let's go right to the question. What does he have in mind? What does Putin have in mind?
Well, Putin has in mind, in my opinion, is to prevail in Ukraine. He certainly won't stop with the lower regions of Ukraine. He'll take the entire country. That's his wish. That's his hope. That may be fading away. So what Putin really needs is a victory. He needs, some say, save face. I think he just needs an outright victory. And since he compares himself to Peter the Great, that may entail several countries in Europe, not just Ukraine. So what other countries might there be? Well, I think a natural one is Belarus. I mean, he has a puppet dictator in there, and what better way to take over a country is just shove aside your puppet dictator that you've installed. And that would be convenient because it's right there next to Ukraine. And he's always complaining that Lukashenko is not doing enough to participate in the Ukrainian conflict, or excuse me, Putin's war, and he should do more. And that hasn't happened. So given Putin's personality, maybe he's just growing impatient. There's already a document out there that Russia will absorb Belarus by 2030. Perhaps Putin is on a impatient timeline, and that could certainly be a lot faster.
Okay, well, there's, I went back and Googled the same subject about what's next, and I found a very interesting article on the AP website, and it spoke about the Baltics and the Balkans, and west of the Baltics and the Balkans as part of Putin's plan. And it described, what he might do. And to my surprise, I realized reading this article, which was so incisive, that it was not written today. It was written a year ago, in April 2022. So this is something that people have been thinking about all the while. It's not like a surprise that Putin has a plan. So, Stephanie, what happens if Putin does not take Ukraine, or that he gets slowed down in taking Ukraine? How has the domino effect changed?
I so appreciate your positive thinking, but right now I think that's phantasmagorical. He is not going to stop. I fear for what we face, and he's not going to stop. He's going straight to Estonia, just like he did in World War II. He's ravenous for it, and nothing is going to stop him short of the Grim Reaper, maybe. So your domino theory is brilliant. We're back at it again, seems to me. And we're going to have to cope with this in some way. And again, I bring up the United Nations and the tools we have, the NATO. We, as a world, as a global community, we are challenged to manage to confront this and make something happen to change the outcome that's determined by him.
Manfred, right? We had a show. We had a couple of shows in the last few days with principles of the democracy movement in Belarus, and it's clear that Belarus is, in contention now. Putin has a lot of control over the puppet Lukashenko. But there's also a partisan freedom movement that opposes that. They blew up a Russian plane near Minsk yesterday, which is interesting, using drones. And so there's pushback. But Putin needs Belarus because Belarus is the gateway from Russia to Western Europe. It's got railway lines, it's got highways, it goes to Poland, goes to Germany. And so I'd like to know what you think about Belarus as a keystone to all of this. Then if Belarus falls, and it may, what happens then to the other Baltics, to Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Poland and Germany, Manfred.
Look, I'm I'm sorry, but I'm not as pessimistic as Stephanie is. And I think Putin will be gone, maybe before the end of the year, because the disenchantment of the Russian political and military elites with his leadership are growing. The only thing that you are confronted with at this point is that there is no one, to take over from him. I mean, when I remember, when Alexei Navalny left the hospital in Berlin in January 2021 and went back to Moscow, he did it because he was confident, that he wanted to show the Russian people that there is someone who has the guts, to go back, even though he knew then that he would end in prison. But I think it was a miscalculation to leave Germany for Russia. He should have stayed in Germany and somehow helped to create the opposition movement in Russia itself. I mean, you have hundreds of thousands of Russian refugees in Berlin. You have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees in Berlin at this point.
Let me add, Manfred, that there's a newspaper called Medusa.io, which is operating in Moscow, but Putin chased them out. And now they're operating in the Baltics beyond his reach. And they are publishing all over the world. But the principle being is that you can do a lot if you want to argue with Putin if you're outside Russia.
Right. I mean, I think Navalny made a big mistake, and he may die. His physical condition is getting worse. But I'm not believing. I mean, even if Belarus becomes somehow integrated into Russia, that is not the beginning of a process that will include all the Baltic states. I mean, if he attacks Estonia, that is the war with NATO.
That's right. Estonia is a NATO country, isn't it?
Right. So for that reason, I will not even say that he is as stupid as that.
Well, but Manfred, we keep on reading articles about how NATO doesn't have the weapons we thought it had. NATO is not able to provide either, the weapons that Ukraine wants, or the ammunition Ukraine wants, or the money Ukraine wants, and there are fractures in the EU coalition. Will the EU, and especially Germany, will they be able to stand up to a Putin advancing into the Baltics?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even you have a strong peace movement in Germany, but you have to remember part of this peace movement were the Greens at one point, but the Greens are now the people within the coalition government, Scholz's coalition, who are pushing for being more assertive than the Social Democrats are. The Social Democrats have a problem. Their identity became affected by Putin's invasion in February of 2022. They didn't expect that to happen. But the Greens did not suffer, for some reason, did not suffer from the same kind of legacy that the Social Democrats do. So for that reason, what you have in Germany today is a strong peace movement. And the most famous philosopher, Jürgen Habermas, he's 93 years old. He suggested, negotiations, but negotiations with whom? With Putin? I mean, Putin is a megalomaniacal tyrant with whom you can negotiate in the same way you could in 1938 with Hitler. And in both cases, the result, the result in 1938 was very clear. It was simply a postponement of the beginning of World War II. and negotiations with Putin at this point, I do not think will lead to anything.
Well, let me go to Tim on this. Tim, there seems to be a peace movement happening in some communities, some countries in Western Europe, and in the United States. Even this morning, the Times reported again that there are members of Congress who don't want to spend money on American defense. We spend something like $800 billion on defense, and they're complaining that's too much. But inherently, they're also complaining they don't want to spend money on Ukraine. There's a peace movement where people say, oh, let's get Putin. I know, and I agree with Manfred. Let's get Putin to the table, and make him an honest broker somehow, even though that we know that's impossible for a psychopath. And let's make peace here. That should be the priority. My question to you is, we have this peace movement that is particularly troubling in the United States. How does that fit into the calculus? Will they be able to create a peace? Will they be able to make Putin into an honest broker and negotiate something, anything, an end to the war? Or is all this shibai?
A lot of questions in there, Jay, but I'll tackle one at a time. I think Joe Biden needs to make the same argument that Franklin Delano Roosevelt made. And as you think you're saving money by not getting involved and not funding this effort with Ukraine, how much more money will you spend once Putin has advanced far enough where now the United States has to get involved? So you pay me now or you pay me much more later. I don't think Joe Biden's making that argument against his detractors on the issue of funding Ukraine. And I think he's missing kind of an opportunity there. As far as, what was your other part of that question, Jay? I'm sorry.
Well, I wanted to know whether that affects the calculus.
Yeah, it does. And obviously Putin is gauging support. I mean, he's looking to say, how strong is my hand here? And the United States is certainly a major player in that. So if, U.S. support or the voters are their support for Ukraine war is weakening, I can continue on. I think it's hard to broker an honest deal with Putin, because I guess in my mind is, how do you broker a real settlement, a real truce, a real peace with a country and a leader that is guilty of war crimes against humanity? How do you reconcile those two opposing factors of peace and a settlement with a war criminal that you have to prosecute?
Stephanie, I think we have to talk about China, because Lukashenko has been drawn into the web of Xi Jinping. They're meeting for a few days in China, and they're forming some sort of alliance. At the same time, as made clear in our discussion with the representatives of Belarus, is that China needs the rail, because the rail crosses Russia and then goes into Western Europe through Belarus. It's very interesting, which the United States should be concerned about, because that's a hole in the boat, if you will. So China is important. Recently at the G20, China and Russia opposed a motion to condemn the invasion of Ukraine. And so that motion could not pass. It was essentially a veto by the two of them. So we have China actively involved in supporting Russia now. And I want to know from you how that affects the calculus of Putin's plans to move into the Baltics and the Balkans.
I think that's a very complicated question and a big projection, but an interesting question. Frankly, Putin's done his China dealing, but China has that railroad interest. They're desperate for those resources of Belarus, which is really good for Belarus because they've got something to hang their hat on here. But let's face it, there's no brokering with this man, and he's the one in charge. And there's no honest making of this man. There's only, frankly, maybe we have to face it, there's nowhere to go but gone. So I think that Manfred's points are very, very good about the hero who went back to Russia and now is in prison. I don't know what his fantasy is. Maybe it's storm the Bastille thing again. I don't know. But
Navalny, and he's filed 50 human rights violations charges against
So
Putin
I don't know
from prison.
why he wanted to take on that agenda. I don't know, but I liked Manfred's position on that very, very much. And that option is lost. Okay, so what other options are there? Where is NATO making a big deal out of prepping for him going into Belarus, or maybe up there to go get one of those other countries, because he'll go in where it's soft, so he can be fast and maybe present a different event than he does in Ukraine, because he's going to do something like that. This is somebody who has no limits. There's no line below which he will not go. So my concern is that NATO is not outright showing that, I mean, other than bringing these other people in, let's arm. And the same thing with the UN. Why are there not proposals being put up?
Because they have the Security Council problem is the answer.
Right. Okay. And so we've got that. But my point is, let's get clear here. This guy's got to go.
Okay.
One or
Manfred,
another.
let me move to you
save
for a
ourselves
moment.
from that guilt.
We seem to be talking about a kinetic war, a kinetic domino effect. We seem to be talking about troops and missiles and artillery. But Putin is a smart guy, and he understands that this kind of version of World War III, some people think it's that, is more than just kinetic war. It's having spies, it's dissembling neighboring governments and faraway governments, for that matter. It's creating divisiveness in countries that might be opposed to him by electronic means, by social media, by all his internet research agency. And, for example, if we look at the Balkans, we find that there are Russian agents all over the Balkans. He has insinuated himself non-kinetically into Transnistria, which is kind of a lost cause, and Moldova and maybe Romania. The Balkans are affected, and I haven't named all the countries in the Balkans, but by this kind of layered effect. And some of the things that Putin does in the Balkans and the Baltics don't cost a lot of money. It's not like he has to bring up the tanks, but he is subverting them anyway, preparing them for his ultimate move to try to take them over. Where does that fit, in this question of where he will go next?
Well, I think your thinking is too grandiose. And I think you give too much credit to Putin. I think this guy is dead, politically dead in Russia. I don't know how long it will take for the military and the political elites to somehow remove him. But when you read European newspapers about what's going on in Russia at this point, I think it is only a matter of time. Now, your constant references, to Estonia or any of the other Baltic countries, and now you include Romania, for God's sake, they are all members of NATO. So please, once he moves into any of them, that's it. And I do not think NATO will not respond. NATO will respond, and even if Erdogan is still standing in front of Sweden's and Finland's membership, I think that will end very, very soon too, because Erdogan, even though he didn't die in the earthquake, but I mean, the earthquake killed him politically in terms of his elections. So for that reason, you will have a united NATO front. And when you are talking about the supply lines, it's very interesting how quick factories have been built in Germany now to build, for example, tanks. It's the same thing with having now all of these liquid gas delivery facilities in harbors that didn't exist before. They have been built within a few months. So the response is much more impressive than people are aware of.
You know, we've had shows with German engineers about their ability to rebuild. After World War II, it was quite remarkable how many communities in Germany were able to get on their feet almost immediately, and how they could help Ukraine now to rebuild, this huge destruction. But, as Germany stand alone, as France is strong. And by the way, we talked about and hoped for the introduction of both Finland and Sweden into NATO. And neither one of them has actually been introduced as a member yet. Finland apparently is on the track to do that soon. But Sweden is somehow derailed thanks to, Viktor Orban and maybe...
No, Erdogan.
And Erdogan too. Yeah.
I mean, it's NATO.
We're not going to get Sweden right away. Well, how does that affect us? Is NATO strong enough? Not only Germany, but NATO, is it strong enough to deal with this?
I think it is.
Okay.
But Jay, can you ask what about the U.S.? What about all of these countries? You're talking about them prepping it, but what about the people? Are they ready to do this? Can you ask that question?
I'll ask that question.
Will they do it?
It's not only the strength of the country and the strength of its economy, it's how the people feel. And, and the same thing in the United States, this noise about how we should not support Ukraine, that is too expensive, let's go for peace, let's try to accommodate Putin. There seems to be a growing chorus. And how much effect is that going to have on the ability of the countries of NATO to stand up in case there is an attack on one of their members?
Well, you have this isolationist trend in the United States. This is almost a birthmark of the United States. So please remember how long it took the United States to overcome this isolationist mentality in the 30s. They needed the Japanese to bomb Pearl Harbor in order to get out of it. Now, I don't know whether something as dramatic as that will happen, because I think the majority of Americans looking at these pictures from the Ukraine and, the crimes against humanity that, are conducted by the Russians are enough to keep a majority on, the side of this anti-Putin majority.
Yeah, I hope so. Tim, you're the media man here. You always talk about the media, and that's why we played the commentary at the beginning of this show to indicate the message that should be coming out to the public. Is it coming out from the media? And does the public understand the stakes here, or are they focused on their shoelaces? That is, let's make peace at any cost, and Putin must be an okay guy, and we should not support war. We should not support Ukraine in its efforts to defend. Is the message getting out? Is the media doing a good job? What else can they do?
Well, remember, Jay, we have two sets of media, and one set doesn't qualify as media, and that's Fox Entertainment, not Fox News. That's not media anymore. We've proven that, or that's been proven. So I'm still seeing on all multiple media stations, including social media, is the heroic efforts of Ukraine. And I'll call it propaganda, but I'll see these positive news stories showing, under overwhelming forces, Ukraine prevails, even if they're, stories about a tank that's been taken down by a Ukraine drone. We're seeing story after story of victories by an overwhelmed and smaller country that's prevailing and holding off the Soviet bear. So those stories, I think, dominate the media. And yeah, we're seeing a few survey polls and a few wingnuts like Marjorie Taylor Greene get out there in front of a microphone. But that's not the story, I don't think, at this point. So I think support is overwhelmingly high for Ukraine. And what Joe Biden needs to do, as I said earlier, is to make a case that it's not just Ukraine, that the United States needs to be fully involved to support Ukraine to prevent Putin from showing his hand against Belarus or other small countries that are non-NATO countries. And I agree with Manfred that no way is Russia going to pick on a Article 5 situation in the NATO Charter and take on a NATO country. It's just not going to happen. And to your point about how this, the last year has shown that NATO is somewhat fractured, I don't think it's fractured. I think it's an alarm bell. And the alarm bell was, they didn't have the equipment to really support as much as we thought NATO could, the Ukrainian effort to fend off Russia.
Stephanie, you and I have been talking to the representatives of Belarus, and in fact, the last discussion with the fellow who ran against Lukashenko said that Belarus has emerged into the public consciousness. It was not really considered a player in all of this, what's going on in Ukraine, but now it is, because it's strategic, because there's violence happening. They blew up that plane near Minsk. There are 5,000 people who've been arrested and are in jail getting tortured. There are border issues. The country has an active partisan democratic movement, and it's going to be more and more at the top of the news cycle. How does that affect things? Because they could be next. According to Putin's leaked memorandum, they are next.
Yeah, true. And they are clearly aware of their emergence as a huge target of the bear, and with a lot to lose. But they also have some resources that are important to Russia as well as China. But they're stepping out, just like these people who are coming to the U.S. and now speaking at these major events and at major conferences to get the word out about Belarus. This is a geography lesson for America, which we need. And we also need to know who these people are. So I still have questions about just how big is that democratic movement and what does that really mean in terms of rubber hitting the road? Okay. So which leads to questions about Russia is tiptoeing around, not stepping on a NATO country. I don't agree with that. I think that when he's ready, Putin's going to do that. But it all depends, I think, on the question of, is there Russian nuclear arsenal in as poor shape as is their army?
Manfred. Perfect.
Manfred could talk to us about, is it in as poor shape as the army? And is he working on building it up now so he's stronger and then he can tiptoe in where he wants?
We have been asking this question, discussing this possibility for months, because Putin, he massages this every time he gets a chance. Are we going to have a nuclear, either tactical or more, war when he gets more and more desperate, and the rug is pulled out from under him somehow by his own people? Is he going to push the button somehow?
No, it's not because he wouldn't try to do it, but I think he would be prevented from doing that, among others, by the Chinese. The Chinese have been very clear about that. In a meeting, for example, Xi Jinping with the German Chancellor Scholz, it became an issue. And the Chinese, I think, are firm on that and have communicated that to Putin. But I don't think Putin needs the communication of the Chinese. I think you will get the response of the military establishment in Russia itself, because they know if they do that, they will be in hell. I mean,
okay, let me ask you that. I've heard that said many times. But suppose Putin, in his desperation, uses tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Because after all, he's going down. His health is going down. He's desperate. How does that affect the calculus with regard to other countries around? Does it galvanize them? Do they become stronger? Are they in horror? Do they take more aggressive steps to deal with him, or do they run away?
All three. It galvanizes them, they are in horror, and some may be running away, even though they cannot run away from nuclear weapons. They will be hit by the. If it becomes a total war, and I do not believe that will happen, and you will have resistance within the military establishment in Russia. So Putin has to be very, very careful with his own military leadership. Whatever mistakes they may have made in his view by not delivering the Ukraine on the platter within a week, but they will not tolerate that, because that's the end of them also.
Well, the other thing I would add to that is that Chernobyl is in Belarus, and Chernobyl is still hot, still radioactive, and so is the memory of people in Belarus and in all of Eastern Europe about what happened in Chernobyl. And one of the comments that Valerie Apicella said this morning is that what exactly is there to conquer in Eastern Belarus with Chernobyl? Is that the kind of territory you want to have? There's really no value except the radioactivity. And so I think it's a fresh memory, relatively speaking, in Europe. And I think it will have a greater effect on people, on their sensibilities than for us, because we don't have that. We haven't had that.
Look, I have not talked with the people that the two of you have talked with from Belarus recently. But remember, Lukashenko, is in a way an illegitimate president. Because the person who won, is in exile in I don't know whether it's Latvia or Estonia, but in any case, you have a huge democratic civil society in Belarus, and for that reason, Lukashenko looks as weak politically as the pre-Zelensky people looked in Ukraine.
Yes, I agree totally. I totally agree. That's true, and he's fragile for that reason.
Right.
And he may be weak at the end of the day when the partisans get stronger, and apparently they are. We're almost out of time, you guys, and I'd like to go round the table here and call for summaries and final takeaway comments. Let's begin with you, Stephanie. What would you like to say, and what would you like people to think of?
Well, I really appreciate Manfred's insights based, on his life and experiences and knowledge of the area. I believe that Putin will, in contrast to Manfred, I think he will. I don't know how he'll go about it, but he has no. There's no bottom line. Okay, so he's either going to hit us with one, and do the Pearl Harbor thing, or he's going to do something like a soft Estonia, go up there and hold them hostage against the NATO onslaught. And then we've all got all of this politics to deal with. And we have to remember that we've got, Trump out there influencing Margie, who's influencing the U.S. House of Representatives. So there's no good, golden deal here that we're coming to the rescue in the same way that we have before. I just want to say one more thing. It's positive. There's a space station up there in which we all cooperate, and especially the Russians. They've saved our grids a couple times. Why can't we build from that? Talking about making an honest man out of Putin. We could start by trying a little bit on that side of making a bigger deal out of that space station cooperation. Why can't that seems to me that we have.
It's funny how that works. And we have a similar relationship with China, where we really need to have the economic interdependence for the benefit of both parties. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah,
Manfred, why don't you go now, Manfred, to give us your thoughts and see if you agree or disagree with what Stephanie was saying.
Well, I certainly disagree with Stephanie, and I don't think the space solution is a very hopeful one. I do not think that Putin will make it. I don't think Putin will be allowed by his own military establishment to make the moves from entering Estonia to using nuclear weapons, because they are aware that's the end for them. So for that reason, I am still optimistic. And remember, you have opposition within Russia, but you have well, that's it. I think I'm not as pessimistic as Stephanie is.
Okay. And Tim, falls on you to make us the sweeping and yet profound meaning out of all of this.
It makes me nervous when you expect me to be profound. It really does make me quite nervous. But let me take a crack at it. Look, Belarus is the main target. Given the context of the title of this show and our discussion, Belarus, I think, is the main target. I think Lukashenko knows that. When he went to China, he put his troops on full alert. Now, he said it was for his concern about Ukraine, but I think he's worried about Russia. And as we've all identified, Lukashenko is a puppet leader. And like all puppet leaders, they can be shoved aside quite easily. And I don't think Putin has one bit of reservation to do that at his will. My God, once you become a staging area for the Russian troops and equipment, what's the next step? The entire country. And it would be quite an advantage to Putin to have Belarus as his next staging area to take on, it's much closer to Kiev, so why not? So I think that's where we're at. And it may not be profound, but I think the handwriting's on the wall that Belarus is the next target. And just to add, I hate to disagree with my co-host, Stephanie here, but there's no way that Putin is going to get away with attacking a NATO country because of the ramifications of the Article 5, all for one for all. And whether NATO has the equipment or not, believe me, the United States, Germany, and all the other NATO countries have more than enough war equipment to wipe Putin off the map.
I can see Manfred agreeing with that. Let me urge our viewers to take a look at the two shows we've done on Belarus. So both of them covered some of these points from the vantage of the democratic movement in Belarus. This has been a great discussion. Really appreciate it, and we'll cover it going forward. My co-host Tim Apicella, our regular contributor Stephanie Dalton. And our special esteemed guest, Manfred Henningsen, emeritus political science at UH for many decades. Thank you very much, all of you. Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.